something outside.
What is that?
Radio.
And good evening, everybody. This is Julie Rench for another episode of On the Shoulders of Giants, Talking Old Timers with the great Thomas Steenburg. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Thomas on in. How you doing?
I'm not getting any younger, Judy. I'm still getting older.
Well, I think age is just a number, right? That's what they say.
That's what they keep telling me, and that's what I keep telling myself. But I seem to be saying it more and more often now.
Yeah, I hear you. You guys having a good winter up there, or how's that going so far?
Dogs for a week.
Oh boy!
But
what's
compared
your
to the rest of
temperature then?
I'll put up with it.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, well, it was 50-something here today, so I guess I can't complain too much. It is the middle of winter. But now, guys, we have a really good show for you guys. We have Mr. Lyle Blackburn with us tonight. Lyle has been doing this for a very long time. He's done writing, music, film, authored several books, including The Beast of Boggy Creek and Lizard Man. Just one heck of a busy guy, and we appreciate him carving out a little bit of time to come on to the show with us tonight. And I want to welcome you on, Lyle. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, we certainly appreciate you being here. Lyle, I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with you. I don't know how you could be involved in this and not be somewhat familiar with you at least. For people who don't know, you've done so much, and you're also in a band, the Ghoultown Band, but what got you started an interest in all of the subject matter, the cryptid world and so forth?
Well, it was something I was always interested in from a young age. I remember getting a book called Strange But True back when I was in elementary school, and that's probably the first time I read about Bigfoot and Yeti and Loch Ness Monster, and had sections like that, and I was just enthralled because I loved monster movies and things, but this to me was like, wow, you could really see some quote unquote monster or whatever legendary beast in real life. So I love that. And then later on saw the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, which, that documents a supposed Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas, which was only about 3 hours from where I grew up in Texas. So that kind of hit home, and that just kind of stuck with me my whole life. And I read books and did things like that, and then later on ended up writing a book on the Legend of Boggy Creek, and that's sort of what propelled me into the more serious research and ongoing books and then documentaries and things like that. So the seed was planted long ago, as I'm sure a lot of us can identify.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm about the same age as you are, and I remember seeing the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek in the theater, and my mom took me there when I was like 7, so it scared the Jesus out of me, but it also planted that seed in me, and I was like, wow, these things are real, I got to know. So, yeah, folks our age, a lot of them were inspired by this particular story, that particular subject matter. So you, I know that you were involved in going down there and talking to, his last name's Crabtree. I can't think of his first name to save my life right now. Smokey.
Right. Yeah. When I started doing this, I kind of, started by going up to Fouke, and my intent there was to discern what was true about the story, and then what was dramatized in the movie. So it's kind of a personal journey to, unravel this famous Bigfoot case. I love Bigfoot encounters and cases, and this certainly was something within my grasp, and I could go up there. And I just started, visiting with people in town, poking around to see what there was. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of interest. Bigfoot wasn't as popular as it is now. And the legend was sort of just treading water there. And so, eventually I was able to interview people who had either had encounters or people that knew a lot about it or were there when the movie was made, and, built this fascinating story, not only of how, this Bigfoot sightings inspired this movie that was a phenomenon in the 70s, but also that there had been encounters that had been going on ever since, but not very well documented or publicized. So then I realized, wow, this whole thing's still going on, and that really propelled my research to, start in a historical place and then come all the way up to now. And then with my latest book, the Boggy Creek Case Book, I've added on, so many more encounters than I even knew about back when I wrote The Beast of Boggy Creek. So, and I knew Smokey Crabtree. He's passed away now, but he was a big part of the Legend of Boggy Creek movie. His various family members had sightings, and Smokey was just a really amazing guy and a great outdoorsman. And so we spent a lot of time, hanging out, and he kind of introduced me to, interesting things about that terrain in that area. So he's missed, but his family members and other folks are all there, and they've since become friends.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember when you first went down there, reading some of the stuff that you had posted about that later on, and I too was like, wow, there's still those sightings going on in that particular area, because, a lot of people think, well, maybe it was just a one-time deal in the 70s, spark people's interest or to make this movie or whatever, but no, it's still going on to this day, is it not?
Yes, in fact, I just got an encounter which occurred on, look at my paper here, I've got a note, January the 4th.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, we're starting off the year here with a bang, and it's been a little quiet there, but I haven't interviewed the witness yet. This was coming from a good friend of mine that lives there that kind of gave me the details that I can follow up on, but this guy saw, it was around 6 p.m., so it wasn't, the sun was, still up and starting to get dusk, I guess, and then he saw what he described as a very orangutan-looking ape-like creature run across the road south of town, south of Fouke. And, his description was he said it kind of ran on all fours, and it had a reddish color hair, which I've heard that a few times. I mean, on occasion you get these encounters where people say it looks more ape-like, or it was moving with its arms down or on all fours. So it was interesting, but sounded like a very credible report in whatever he saw. he definitely saw something and kind of fits in with some of the strange encounters that's been going on there in Fouke. So these are the kind of things I get pretty much on a regular basis.
Well, I know that Thomas knows a lot about the events that took place down there, and I know that's one of his favorite encounter stories too. Thomas, did you have some stuff you wanted to throw in there?
Absolutely. Great to talk to you, Lyle. Thomas Steenburg here. Good fan of the work you've done over the years. I've read The Beast of Boggy Creek, and I'm just finishing Sinister Swamps, which is a book you just wrote not too long ago, and it took me over 4 months to get it because of COVID.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah,
I ordered it back
kind of crazy.
in June. You just got it a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, that's kind of weird because I've been shipping out countless numbers of those, and I assume Amazon has been fulfilling their orders. But
no, there's a little bookstore here in town I usually go through to find difficult to get, and they're pretty good at it. But sometimes it takes time now, and getting books across the border, the COVID has slowed everything right down to a crawl.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a mess as far as that all goes. So I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I remember back when I was a boy, I went to see the Legend of Boggy Creek too when it went up, but I was already fascinated with the Sasquatch legend and mystery, and I, like most people, thought of the Sasquatch as a West Coast phenomenon. When the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek went out, I was amazed that such things had been seen in the eastern part of the continent too, because of course I had not heard too much about that. And when me and my cousin would sneak into the Bancroft Theater to see the movie again and again and again before we got caught, I was just fascinated. But I always wanted to ask you, the movie always gave the public, the impression that most of the alleged footprints found by what they referred to as the Fouke monster. I often wonder why it wasn't called the Jonesville monster, because it seemed most of the encounters seemed to be around that area, was actually 5-toed, not 3. Is that true?
Well, the footprints that were found right around in 1971 that the film concentrates on, as far as the film, really, there were, in the first sort of public encounter, which happened at the Ford house, in which over the course of several days, this thing came around on the porch, and this is the last part of the movie, but this was really the first kind of thing that happened that went in the papers. The sheriff said that he saw what looked like some kind of 3-toed tracks up near the house. They didn't take a photo of those or anything. And then several weeks later, in a bean field, it was freshly plowed, they found a big long line of tracks that were 3-toed. I mean, essentially kind of a narrow-looking Bigfoot track, but it only had 3 toes. And that really just sort of cemented the idea that the Fouke monster tracks all had 3 toes, but some of the other ones, there was one that occurred in a few years later that corresponded to a sighting. Those tracks looked to be 4-toe. And then over the years, there have been other tracks that have come up, and those are more like 5-toe, just sort of you're more close to what we would think of as a Bigfoot track. So the unfortunate thing here is that all sorts of numbers of toe, orientations have been found, which just sort of complicates the mystery more than it already is.
Absolutely. Now, the Willie Smith Beanfield tracks, the ones you're referring to, did that occur while the movie was being filmed, or was it before?
It was before. That was June 13th, 1971. He didn't start filming the movie till fall of that year. So it looks rather real in the scenes, because literally, some of the reporters, like Dave Hall, who was a radio reporter here in Texarkana, he's shown in that scene of the movie, he was literally there when they happened. So it looked it looked almost like they were filming it, that it just happened, but they were reenacting it, but it had not been too many months before when it actually happened.
When they reenacted, did they actually film it in the spot, or was it somewhere else?
They literally filmed it in the spot.
I thought so. Okay. And the Ford incident, I understand, based on what you wrote in your book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, that they actually did not film that at the actual Ford house. They filmed it in another one nearby.
Right. When the Ford encounters happened in May of 1971, that got in the Texarkana Gazette and made a big buzz in the newspapers, and it was like one of these things where people were going down there trying to look at the house and stuff. So when Pierce came to make the movie, the cool thing was he was really trying to be as authentic and as he could, so he wanted to film in that house. But the people who owned it, they were renting it to the Fords, and the people who owned it were asking too much money, and Pierce just didn't have hardly any budget. And so what he did was just go up to Texarkana, which was not even in Fouke, and used a house up there that was near a creek. So he had to just do what he had to do. So that's not the actual house, and the Ford house has since been torn down. So if you go to Fouke today, you couldn't see it.
Okay. Now, I read in other books through the time on accounts of what was going on in the Ford incident. There was a young boy who was basically, curiosity seekers would come and look at the house, much to the annoyance of the owners, and he'd make a little pocket money by showing people around and stuff like that. And he told a lot of people that some of the neighbors, when the Fords actually were going out and shooting at whatever this was in the dark, some of the neighbors found that one of their horses that they had let loose to run around free in the property next door was actually shot dead. Do you know of that?
Yes, that is true. There was a horse, an old horse that kind of roamed around there, and several people, including Smokey, kind of proposed that maybe what the Fords were seeing was the horse. But I've thoroughly pored over this, and I've talked to various people who, even the former Miller County Sheriff, and I'm quite positive whatever they saw, it wasn't a horse. But I think the horse might have got shot, possibly because they were shooting. They were up there shooting at this thing, and they very clearly described it as running upright on two legs. It looked, ape-like, yet moved like a person, and it was probably 7 feet tall. There's a good description in some of the newspapers straight from the Ford, so I'm pretty confident.
And Bobby Ford said he was grabbed by the thing, and I don't think a horse would grab somebody, but was the constable or sheriff, I'm not sure what exactly his police rank was it a man by the name of Walraven?
Yes, that was him, and that was, Walraven's a real guy. He did investigate.
Is he still alive?
No.
Okay, did you ever get a chance to talk to him?
No, he passed away before I started that, so.
I was just curious if anyone ever got his opinion on what was going on and what his conclusions were.
Right. No, unfortunately, nobody ever went back and interviewed him, in depth, aside from what was already in the Texarkana Gazette and so a few other papers. The best source I had for that was the former Miller County, in Fouke in Miller County, was a former Miller County Sheriff, H.L. Phillips, and he was on duty during the heyday of all that stuff, and of course he was well informed of, each thing going on, and so I could sort of get his view of it from a law enforcement perspective.
Okay, now would it be the same department responding to reports that were actually closer to Jonesville than Fouke?
All of the incidents that occurred in Jonesville were not public knowledge, so no police responded to any of that, and all that occurred from the 1950s. I mean, it goes back even further, but primarily from the 50s on up to the mid-60s, there were a lot of sightings in Jonesville, and that's when it was originally called the Jonesville Monster, because it was just the locals calling it that, and that's when Smokey Crabtree's son had his sighting and so forth, but none of those ever made it into the newspaper or anything. That was just something that was, knowledge among the residents in and around Jonesville, which is just a community down by the Sulphur River, very close to Fouke. And then it wasn't until May of 1971 until it actually became sort of public knowledge when the Ford incident made it into the paper. So all that other stuff was sort of pieced together after the fact. It was almost like, well, hey, this isn't the first time people have seen a big hairy monster. We've been seeing it down here for a decade or 20 years. And then all of a sudden people go, wow, okay, there's something going on here.
Yeah, it was basically the movie that made it world famous.
Right. And then, of course, we know today that there is plenty of other cases around the South and other states that are similar, but Boggy Creek, just stands out and has become hugely famous just because it had a phenomenon of a movie behind it, whereas, other things that would be similar sort of have faded away because, there was nothing made out of it. So, Fouke is not an isolated incident, but it is certainly one that has, in my opinion, a lot more credibility, a lot more sightings, and a lot more consistent history than some of the other places in the South.
So in your opinion, do you think the incidents around Fouke, Arkansas, may be connected to, let's say, Momo in Louisiana and sightings in Texas as well?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and most certainly in the case of the Texas sightings, because if you just jog about 45 minutes south through the woods, you're in East Texas, and it's all fairly contiguous. The Sulphur River, along which there's been numerous Boggy Creek-related sightings, the Sulphur River starts in Texas and runs through Arkansas and then back.
Right. Fouke and Jonesville
south.
is right down there in the southwest corner of the state, right?
Right. So all of that, including Louisiana, any creature seen there, a Bigfoot-like creature, it could just as well be the Fouke monster, because surely they would roam a wider area, and there's certainly even today a lot of heavily forested areas in that zone, along with the water web from the Sulphur River to the Red River to the Mississippi. So yeah, it's all tied together, much like John Green basically said, in Sasquatch: The Apes Among Us back in the late 70s. He was on to that already,
Right. Yeah, the movie unfortunately had a few drawbacks. One, it gives you the impression it was a single animal all by itself, and of course we know there's probably assuming that these creatures do exist, that there's probably a population of them. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that's words right out of my mouth there. That's exactly it. And the movie certainly, it needed some pathos for that, the character of the creature. So Pierce was very and the writer Earl Smith is great to give it sort of that lonely, it's alone, it's solitary feel, but certainly in real life, in terms of if it's a biological creature and all that, there's got to be a population living down there. It can't just be one.
Do you have any idea why Pierce, when he made his movie, stuck with actual names in certain incidents and then gave fake names and changed identity of other witnesses? Like, it's obviously the case where the kid goes running out because he thinks dogs are chasing something, and he took a shot at it and allegedly wounded it. That's the Crabtree boy incident, yet the movie gives you the impression it's someone completely different, unrelated.
Right. He when possible, he wanted to use the actual witnesses, because originally the working title was called Tracking the Fouke Monster, and it was more of a documentary the way it started, and he was very much trying to use the real people and the real names, but some of them wouldn't agree to it. And Lynn Crabtree, the kid Smokey's son that had the sighting in around 65, he just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want any part of it. So Pierce, couldn't use his name, but you can, it's the story. It's just a little bit different, and they used another Fouke kid to reenact it. But and he changed a few names, but most of them were the actual names and real people. And even sometimes the person was older, and when they did the reenactment, he had to use somebody else. Like in the scene where Mary Beth Searcy has a sighting, the scene, she's out at the well, and it's starting to get dark, and she goes in and she's reading, and the baby's getting cold, come put a blanket over the window, and all that stuff. And that was the actual Mary Beth playing the part of her older sister. So little nuances of trivia
at the actual house. Yeah.
And that was literally the house where the sighting took place. That was the window she looked out when she saw this thing in 64. And that house still stands. And, I've been to that. I've been to that window. I've, looked around that house, which is pretty neat just because it's kind of an icon, at least to us, in terms of movie magic.
Yeah. I also was wondering about the incident with the 3 girls in the trailer that were panicking with the rifle.
Yes, that was based on a real incident, and I did speak to one of the girls who was in the trailer, the one that was the actual person that lived in Fouke, and they lived County Road 9, right by where Boggy Creek crosses over. And she told me that, they didn't see anything, but she said that gave a good sense of what was going on at the time, because there was that sort of frenzy and fear, and, with all these reports coming out in the newspapers there in spring and summer of 1971, everybody was on edge. And so certainly you put 3 high school age girls at home alone, any bump in the forest is going to be the Fouke Monster. And she said it was just a truly kind of scary time. And so I guess she or somebody had told the story to Charles Pierce, and he thought, that'll make a great scene, of them, fearing that the thing's coming around.
Okay. Now, I was informed by Smokey. I never met Smokey. He was a friend of the late Bill Miller, who was a colleague and friend of mine, and we only exchanged letters. And he sent me a couple of copies of his book, Smokey and the Fouke Monster, autographed. He told me that the hermit character, Herb Jones, was a real guy who did live the way he did, and he met a tragic end because apparently he had fallen through the floor of that shack that he was in, was stuck there, and no one found him for weeks. Is that unfortunately true?
Unfortunately, yes, that is true.
Okay.
Herb Herb Jones, which his family is why it's called Jonesville. He was a hermit and lived for about 20 years down in Mercer Bayou, which is a very swampy, kind of the swamp scenes you see in Legend of Boggy Creek. That's the habitat, and he actually lived there. In fact, I know where his shack used to be, and I went down there and excavated a bunch of his things out of there, bottles and parts of his shack, and I took a canoe down there and pulled some relics out of there that are now in various Bigfoot museums and stuff. But it was kind of neat just to go to that spot and stand there and think about the movie. And but yeah, he did fall through the shack and got stuck, and he just succumbed to the elements because it was during a rather cold time, and he actually froze to death. And Sheriff Phillips, the guy that I talked about that I knew, he was the one that actually went down there and found him, and because nobody had heard from him for a while, and he went down there and found him dead. So I got that story straight from the sheriff.
How long after the movie was complete and he did those scenes did that happen?
I think I was years after that. It wasn't.
Okay.
It wasn't immediately after the movie, and unfortunately, because of the movie, like he had a bottle tree with a bunch of bottles and stuff, and a bunch of yahoos went down there and shot up all those bottles and kind of messed with him after that. So he kind of blew the privacy of his place because people kind of knew he was living down there, unfortunately, and it's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
And that was indicative of some of what Smokey went through as well. I mean, there was all kinds of, you can imagine, when the monster was making headlines in the paper, you had a lot of people wanting to hunt it and come to town. Well, when the movie got big, you had hundreds of people down there with 12 packs and shotguns running amok on people's properties, including Smokey's, and the folks in Fouke, rightly so, did not appreciate all that.
Oh, yes, I know. I remember Smokey told me he had a sign on his property saying "Monster Hunters Not Welcome."
Yeah, Smokey was, he liked to. It bothered him a lot, I guess is the best way to say it, and he got riled up by all that stuff. Some people kind of shrugged it off, but certainly Smokey got the brunt end of a lot of it, and the poor guy had to put up signs, and his privacy was invaded. So I know he had his view of the Legend of Boggy Creek is not as romantic as mine is. I'm looking at it, or all three of us looking at it from the outside, but the people that lived there had to deal with the monster hunters and all the hoopla.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And having you said that, I just want to tell you, I watched your documentary, The Boggy Creek Monster, The Truth Behind the Legend, and I thought it was fantastic. I thought you did an excellent job, and I'm usually one of the biggest critics of most of the documentaries that comes out nowadays, but I really enjoyed the one you did there. I thought it was very well done, and I'd like to hear if you have any criticisms on what was shown in the movie that wasn't true.
Well, mostly, I suppose, the movie sensationalizes it a bit, while pretty much everything in there is a true encounter, with the Fords and all that kind of stuff. It kind of plays it up dramatically, but it's really not too far off the truth. The only there's a couple of those things I couldn't find a real source for. There's a guy at some Apache ranch or something. Nobody knows what that is, and we can never figure out who is that scene. I can't find a source for that. But almost all the others, like the guy that found the dead hogs, what kind of thing would carry off 200-pound hog? I talked to that guy. I called him on the phone, and he's like, "What? You want to talk to me about this?" I'm saying, "Yeah." And
how about a fellow who had his dog killed?
Howard Walraven? Yeah, I've talked to him.
Yeah, he's the one who said it looked like the dog had its hide ripped right off its back. But I'm going to get him one of these days, and that's going to be all she wrote.
That's right. Yep, he's a real guy, and he's still alive.
All right.
And so, and some of the voices, I'd say something that isn't true to life is some of the voices are overdubbed. Some of those aren't the actual people. So they would once they had filmed the reenactment, they would a lot of times not film with sound, and then sometimes overdub a different person's voice. So I know that bothered some of the folks in Fouke, but it's just Pierce kind of had to do that because he didn't have a lot of fancy equipment or budget to mic everybody up with wireless mics and all this stuff that we could do now, like we did in our documentary. So there are things like that, but
how about the character who was narrating the whole story? Who was supposed to be the little kid running across the field in the beginning of the movie to get the fellow to come down and check out because his mama told him to go get him, and at the end he's back at his own homestead saying he's still here. Was that based on a real guy, or was that totally made up?
Well, it was constructed into a bookend kind of thing. The story about the kid running to town is a true story. And I've got that in my newer Boggy Creek case book. I've got a really good, I really nail those down in chronological order. But anyway, the kid runs to town. The thing at the end where he comes back and revisits as an adult and all that, that was just made up to kind of tie up the movie, which was brilliant, and that was added in. But there really was a kid whose mom, they saw what the mom described as a wild man or something down there at the edge of their field, and that poor kid had to run a good mile up there to Fouke to tell the guys to come back down there, and then the kid had to run back home. So I thought, boy, I'd have been scared to death when I was that kid.
Yeah. The movie gave the impression that the narrator was the kid, and he'd been, going on with this all his life, and he went back. So that was all fiction added, I guess. He was basically the narrator of the whole thing.
Yeah, well, and that was the character of the narrator, that he was the kid, and then he went back, and that the narrator was a weatherman from Shreveport, Louisiana, that came in and narrated that to good effect. And then he also narrated another one of Charles Pierce's movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. So you hear that.
I remember that one.
But that was just a weatherman with a really good voice that Pierce knew from his days of working in film, TV down in the Shreveport, Texarkana area.
Another question I have for you: there is a very nerve-wracking scream in the movie that I heard was an actual recording made in the Fouke region. Do you know if that is true or not? Basically the scream of the monster that's heard throughout the film.
Right. Yeah, I get that question a lot. To the best of that I can determine, and I've spoken to the son of the guy who composed the music and did most of the soundtrack noises and things, and they built that scream with a combination of a couple of animals. They're not quite sure what animals, but according to Pierce, his story was that he had been down there with Smokey, and they had actually recorded audio of the Fouke monster's scream, and that's what you hear in the film. Well, knowing darn well what audio sounds like in the woods, that wouldn't be high enough quality. So I think it's possible that if they did record something down there, they then incorporated that into the scream you hear in the movie, but they had to mix it in with some other animals and things to really, beef it up. So that's how it was done. So it was a combination, much like they would do any Star Wars creature or anything else, where they'll often take a known animal or two or three and then blend them together until it creates this sort of natural yet monstrous sounding effect. And possibly in this case, we literally had a monster howl from Pierce down there.
So true but exaggerated.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's the theme of the movie there.
A lot of years. It was used in other movies too, like The Creature from Black Lake and so on and so forth. It was quite nerve-wracking. I always wondered if that story about them actually recording it down there when they were making the movie was true, and I never was able to get an answer on that. Thank you, Lyle.
Yes, I've asked a lot about that one. So, and Pierce is was a good showman, salesman, and movie maker. So, I'm never quite sure what to believe about that, but I do know that they were down there and they heard, Smokey said, they heard what they believed was the creature. So I know whether they recorded it or not, they did hear some sounds down there, much like today if we were doing Bigfoot research, we might hear it. So.
Well, now when he did this documentary / movie, I don't think anybody suspected it would become so popular, did they?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, it was literally a fluke. I mean, this is a guy that not connected to Hollywood. He had never made a movie. The subject was about a Bigfoot. Nobody. It was just a laugh. I think the Buddy Ledwell, which was a big businessman there in Texarkana, which put up the money, the whole $160,000 for Pierce to make it, I think he was worried he was going to get his $160,000 back. And, of course, he made millions and millions on the whole thing later, so he had no worries. In fact, when they started showing it, distributors and stuff wouldn't touch it. Pierce had a copy of the movie, and he owed Ledwell money, so what he had to do was rent out a theater in Texarkana and start showing it himself. That's called four-walling, where you literally, put up the money for the theater and just start showing a movie yourself. Well, the buzz about that creature was so big that there was immediately lines and lines around the block. So then he got a second print of the film and started showing it in Shreveport, Louisiana. Same thing, lines and lines. And they would move it around the theaters, and they had a guy whose sole job was to go around to the theaters at the end of the night and collect all the cash, whatever it costs, $1 or $2 to get in. This guy was the bag man, and he had to go around and gather up big loads of cash so that they could get them safely into the bank. But these guys had no idea, when they were making this movie, that in a short period of time they were going to be just rolling in cash, and they literally were.
Oh yeah, and that also that like we had talked before, that the monster hunters were coming out of the woodwork. I don't think that anybody really even gave that much forward thinking about, well, if this becomes popular, we're going to have this to deal with, we're going to have that to deal. They didn't really think that over because they didn't think it was ever going to be an issue. And then next thing you know, all this other stuff happened. You've got, like you said, people with guns and 12-packs coming on people's property, and it got a little crazy.
Right, yeah, it was no idea, Fouke didn't even have a police force. They depended on the Miller County Sheriff's Office and the deputies. So they, there was more, and Fouke is so small. I mean, there was sometimes more outsiders coming in there than it was people that even lived there. And of course, in retrospect, I mean, nowadays, they could make a lot of money on tourism or what have you, but it just blindsided them. Willie Smith was making some, Fouke Monster Track replicas and selling them. So a few people made good on it as best they could, but it definitely was a big surprise to them.
And the movie kind of, I'm not sure if it could be, I kind of feel the movie kind of started the genre of the docudrama. I mean, there had been television documentaries on Sasquatch before this, but this is the first time you had a combination documentary drama in the theaters on the subject.
Right. Yeah, I think it was highly influential. And I mean, if you kind of look at the way those things from that time period and what Pierce, the format, now we're watching Finding Bigfoot with reenactments and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, man, Pierce was literally doing that filming that in 1971. So I think very cutting edge, not only in terms of independent movie making, but yeah, this sort of docudrama thing that we see so much with Bigfoot and paranormal things that have come since,
Before their time and didn't even know it.
And we hold on to the Legend of Boggy Creek.
Well, I'll tell you, the thing that I take away from all of this conversation we just had was thinking back that sightings and encounters were going on in the Jonesville area, the Fouke area, back into the 50s, maybe even before that, but for sure we know in the 50s. That's kind of when things started taking off over in the Pacific Northwest as well, with the Jerry Crew incident and all the stuff that came forth out of that. So, who knew that we had that going on in the Deep South at the same time it was going on in the Pacific Northwest, because it never got the kind of attention, or discussion.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point for credibility, because, the people in Fouke knew nothing about Jerry Crew or anything, and the people in the Pacific Northwest knew nothing about Fouke, yet these things were sort of developing parallel during the same time periods, ramping up towards, the late 60s and 70s, when all of a sudden we became aware publicly about some of this stuff nationwide. And so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's
that
good validation.
Right.
Yeah, and Lyle, other than the Sulphur River bottoms and the Fouke and Arkansas area, what other areas have you been looking into that you find absolutely fascinating? I mean, finishing your book, Sinister Swamps, it almost seems like almost all of them have legends, and not just Sasquatch, but legends of other things too.
Yeah. Over the years, I kind of, once I had done the Beast of Boggy Creek book, and I had done a lot of like Bigfoot research in East Texas and around where I lived, Oklahoma, kind of hung around with some Bigfoot guys. I looked into a lot of cases then across the South, skunk ape type things, all the way from, Texas to Florida and in between. So concentrated on that in my Beyond Boggy Creek book, where I sort of go beyond and talk about the whole Deep South. And yeah, it's just, the phenomenon is just there with the history and modern sightings. And then the Momo case, I always thought that was a kind of a cool one. It had a lot of similarities to the Fouke case. It just, it didn't have a movie, so it wasn't as famous, but it had a ton of newspaper coverage, and there was a lot of weird stuff that went on. So I enjoyed going up to Missouri and researching that book. And then the Sinister Swamps was kind of came out of my fascination for that swampy environment. I just love that kind of, maybe I watch too many Scooby-Doo cartoons or whatever, but, I always love that, I'm saying, like that setting with the swamp and it's spooky, and then people see ghosts and monsters. And so over the years, I would just kind of collect these reports and newspaper articles that revolved around swamps, famous swamps or small swamps, and that kind of came into the Sinister Swamps book, where I could kind of really cover a lot of ground there and cover some other phenomenon. But I always come back to the Boggy Creek case. The latest book, the Boggy Creek case book, is just literally chronological, one by one, all the sightings going back from the early 1900s all the way till, well, the end of last year or so when I finished that manuscript. So, that's always kind of the special one, but I'm always, looking for lines on other interesting cases and taking witness reports and stuff like that. So, I concentrate on the South, I would say, is a theme here.
Well, we certainly do have a lot going on down here in the South.
Yeah, there's a lot. People ask me, hey, when are you going to write a book about Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest? I'm like, look, man, there's a lot of really great researchers and writers that have written books about that over the years. And, hard to read them all. I said, I got so much going on down here, and I'm, this is the place where I can travel to those places, and I can go to the sites and interview the witnesses, because that's what I do. And so, yeah, I've always just found plenty to do within, a general southern area.
Yeah,
well,
I'd love to have you come
you
up my way here in North Carolina, where I live right outside the Uwharrie Forest. We have a lot going on up here. Would love to have you come up this way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's
and I
spot.
think they'd love to come to British Columbia someday, Lyle. It's an incredible country up here, mountains and trees.
Yeah, I'd love to get up there. I've been to Canada several times touring with bands and stuff, but it's always never been all the way up there. I've been to Washington State, but never British Columbia. So someday I'd love to go out there, and especially if I had time just to enjoy the scenery.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the heart of Bigfoot, that's sort of like one of those, bucket list things where I could just do a West Coast tour from California all the way up and just sort of do Bigfoot stuff all the way, sights and sounds, and visit people. That would just be cool if I ever had that much time,
And the border is open again because COVID's gone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. When when the pandemics are gone and so forth. and the rioters.
Rough year last year. But Lyle, I'm going to ask you. We're getting short on time here. I want to make sure I get this in. You've got your hand into so many fires. What is your next big project, or can you share? I know sometimes people can't get into a lot of what they're into. That's not quite come out yet. But do you have anything you can share with us about what direction you're heading next?
Yeah, I've got several book ideas, and I did a lot this year with a couple of books out and then getting an album out, and I think going forward I've got 2 different books I want to do, which is I'm freeing up some time so I can concentrate. One of those actually it falls into the true crime genre, although it has connections to cryptids. So kind of flexing my boundaries there, sort of like I did with Sinister Swamps. And then the other one is a lot of people have been asking me about Dogman, and I've always loved sort of the Dogman or even, werewolf, traditional werewolf tales. So that's another another thing to pursue more in detail with something on the Dogman perhaps. So those are the ideas going forward.
Oh wow! And that's going to be in book format.
Yeah, books are it's what I like to do the best, and the films and stuff. Unless Seth and the guys want to do head up to Small Town Monsters, I'm always game to team up with film, but I'm never the captain on those ships. I just enjoy the book process and the writing of that, so probably stick with it. Lately book sales have been good. I guess people are home on lockdown reading books, so
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Can't complain.
Yeah, they're locked down listening to music too, Lyle. So what's the name of your band for all those who don't know it?
The band is called Ghoultown.
Ghoultown.
And Ghoultown is I was a musician before I was writing books, and have been a musician semi-professionally or professionally for almost my entire life since high school. So that band, we don't tour like we used to, but we put out an album every several years, which does well. And so I just completed one this year, and you can find Ghoultown. There's links from my LyleBlackburn.com site to the band Ghoultown if people want to check it out, or it's on iTunes and everywhere else. But yeah, the music is fun. Kind of a change of pace every once in a while.
Mhm. And the books that you do have, the Beast of Boggy Creek, Beyond Boggy Creek, Lizard Man, Momo, Boggy Creek, say that 10 times fast. The Boggy Creek case book. All those, are they available through Amazon as well?
Yes, you can get all of them on Amazon. They're in paperback and ebook format, and even some of them are in hardback. So yeah, just search me up on Amazon.
All right. Well, Thomas, do you have anything else you wanted to add? We just got a couple more minutes here.
I just wanted to get his impression on the whole Lizard Man thing. What does he think on that?
Yeah, that's certainly kind of a more bizarre and puzzling case. It has some solid witnesses and a much more concentrated group of sightings back in the late 80s. My opinion on that is it's kind of a stretch to think that there's sort of a reptilian humanoid or something thereof. But I truly believe people definitely were seeing something, and I go into propose a few theories in my book that it could be misidentified Bigfoot or something else, but certainly a really bizarre and interesting case, and another one that affected a whole entire town with all the press and the media and the monster hunters and all the bizarre stuff revolving around this reptilian humanoid. So I never had I don't have a solid answer on that, other than I'm quite confident people saw something they could not identify.
Mhm. Well, I agree with that. Well, Lyle, I'll tell you what, it's been awesome, and I could sit here for a couple more hours, but we know how the time restraints are on these things. But I really appreciate you joining us, and I know Tom and I are both big fans of your work, and we appreciate you, and you're definitely a motivator.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. It's an honor to talk to both of y'all, and you're some of the well-known and great researchers and folks in this field. So it's always great and fun to talk about these subjects.
Great, awesome. I appreciate it. Well, Thomas, I guess that's it for us. It's a wrap for this one, but we'll be back again next month with another episode of On the Shoulders of Giants, talking old timers with Thomas Steenburg. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you next time.
Great talk to you, Lyle. I enjoyed it very much.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me. Talk to you later.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. And On the Shoulders of Giants is brought to you, of course, by Monster X Radio. Thank you.